This program contains descriptions of violence, drug use, and sexual assault. Previously on True Texas Crime.
I'm probably even angrier, honestly, just because it's so fresh, again, talking about it and hearing about it. And I guess that's really the only way that I can explain it. It makes me just want to go do more at this point in time with everything that's going on with the continuation of Lee now. Just real briefly, yesterday they did a continuance, so he didn't actually get sentenced yesterday. So I'm kind of more on top of it again instead of backing off like I did before.
This is True Texas Crime, the significant life of Angela Stevens. Episode 8, New Charges, New Federal Sentencing. Thank you for joining us for this bonus episode. One thing about this podcast is that we've always tried to keep the focus on Angela and her story. And while it's a part of the story to share the facts of the case and the sentencing of the 3 murderers, we have never wanted to do a deep dive into those details. I shared in episode 5 that paroled murderer Lee Henson would be sentenced on August 27, 2024, for counts 1 and 6 of his federal indictment for various drug trafficking charges. I explained he had reached a plea agreement with federal prosecutors. I did not share that part of that plea agreement was that 5 counts of the indictment were dismissed. The charges were so serious, I honestly didn't think it would matter. I truly believed Lee would be going back to prison for a very long time. Lee's sentencing was postponed until September 24, 2024. Today, we sadly must report to you that Lee was only sentenced to 63 months for conspiracy to distribute fentanyl and 60 months for possession of a firearm in furtherance of drug trafficking to be served consecutively. Everyone involved in this podcast and the Stevens family is outraged by the length of this sentence. Since I'm a beginner in crime research, I felt it was important to get an expert to come on the show and talk about how something like this can happen. Francey Hakes is a former state and federal prosecutor who has spent her entire career specializing in crimes against children, both online and in the real world. She shares my belief that the most important thing is to give voice to the victims who often don't have a voice in the justice system. Francey can currently be heard as the co-host of the podcast, Best Case, Worst Case. Welcome to the show, Francey, and please feel free to share anything else about your background with our audience.
Thanks, Julie. I really appreciate you having me on. I think you have done a thorough job of summarizing my 16-some-odd year career as a prosecutor. I did lots of things. You're right. I did specialize in crimes against children, but I had a wide variety of cases because in no office where I worked, whether it was the DA's office or the U.S. Attorney's office, was that all I did. So I did lots of violent crimes of all types, murder cases, child murder cases, national security kind of cases, terrorism sort of things. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on to talk about this case. And I'm just so pleased that you have kept the victim at the forefront of everything you're doing on the podcast.
Thank you. Well, tell me, I know that you looked up the case for us. Just give us the basics of what you know about what's happened with this sentencing.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, Julie, is that according to the court documents that I reviewed today, his sentences for 63 months for the drug trafficking and 60 months for the carrying a gun while committing a drug crime, those are actually going to be served consecutively. So that's a 123-month sentence. So he's gotten a 10-year sentence in this case, and there's a reason for that. So he was originally indicted for 7 different counts, and he pled guilty to 2 of them, counts 1 and count 6. Count 7 was the felon in possession of a firearm, and counts 2 through 5 were all drug-related, some for cocaine, some for fentanyl. So he pled guilty to 1 fentanyl trafficking count and what's called a 924C. Now, a 924C, that's just the federal statute. So you can look it up, 18 U.S. Code 924C. The crime is for carrying a firearm during the commission of a drug crime. And the law requires that that sentence be imposed and served consecutively to the drug crime. So that's why that particular count was a sticking point, I suspect, for the U.S. Attorney's Office there in Mississippi, was because they wanted that consecutive sentence. Because if he had been sentenced for all those drug crimes, they would have kind of all been squashed together. If he'd been sentenced for being a felon in possession and the drug crimes, they would have been squished together, concurrent. But the 924C count is required by law to be served consecutively. So he'll be serving 123 months. Now, it's possible that he won't serve all 123 months, but in the federal system, they generally serve 85% of their time. So he's going to be there for a good while.
Now, can you explain to our audience about, does it matter that he is a criminal on parole for murder? Are those facts not allowed to be mentioned in the new charges? Talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. If Henson had gone to trial, Julie, the fact that he was a convicted murderer would never have been heard by the jury. It would have been absolutely forbidden for the prosecutor to bring it up because it's a murder case. And if he had been previously convicted of drug trafficking, they could have brought that up. But they can only bring up cases if they're similar. It's called similar transaction evidence. And here, it's not similar. There's nothing similar about the horrific murder that he committed and the drug and gun crimes that he committed. So the prosecutor of the U.S. Attorney's Office would not have been allowed to tell the jury that he was a convicted murderer on parole. And what's interesting about that is I've had many juries where I've had cases where the defendant has had prior convictions. And when the jury found out about it later, after the case was over, they were furious because they felt like that was something that they would have, they should have deserved to know, and that they felt cheated that they didn't have that piece of information. And so the jury never would have heard that information. However, the judge definitely knew that information. It was definitely given to the judge as part of the request for sentencing. It would have been in the pre-sentence investigation report, what's called the PSR, the pre-sentencing report by the probation department, the federal probation department. They would have written a very long report that's not available to the public. And that very long report would have given his entire criminal history and facts about that prior murder case and when he was on parole and that he was on parole. And so it's up to the Texas authorities to decide whether they want to revoke his parole and send him back to prison should any of his sentence still be outstanding, or should the new charges have been a violation of his parole, which I imagine they absolutely were. They almost always are, unless your parole is over. If there was a specific time limit and he served it, then he didn't violate it by committing these new crimes. But my understanding is he was inside his parole period. So it seems to me he's violated a parole. But the truth is, 10 years is a reasonably long sentence. I'm not sure any judge in Texas would revoke his parole for that time. I'm not sure he had 10 years left on his sentence. You might be able to answer that, Julie, whether he did. But I suspect the Texas authorities are just going to let him, go to federal prison and serve his time there.
Oh, that's not the news I wanted to hear. Is there any kind of advocating the family can do to the Texas authorities, and who could they do it to about that?
Yeah, they absolutely should. They should be listed with the Texas, I'm not sure what they call it here. In Georgia, it's the State Board of Pardons and Paroles. That's usually what it's called, something like that in every state.
It is called that there, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles.
Okay, so what they want to do, the family should already be listed as victims in his case file, but they want to make sure of that. I would contact the district attorney's office in Texas that handled the prosecution and make sure that they are listed as victims in his State Board Pardons and Parole file, so that if there's any activity, if there's a warrant issued because of violation of his parole, if they try to revoke his parole, if he goes back to prison in Texas, they are listed as people who must be notified of those proceedings. And then they generally would have a right to appear at the proceedings and be heard on the matter to whoever is making the decisions, the Board of Pardons and Paroles usually. So if I were them, I would ensure that the DA's office has ensured that they are listed on his pardons and parole file as victims.
Okay, and then if we kind of do the math, which I don't have done off the top of my head of how much time is left on his sentence, if there is time that would be left in addition to the 10 years in federal prison, is that something that audience members and or family members can, write the district attorney about and say, we think this person needs to be prosecuted for violation of parole once their federal charges are served?
Yeah, I would definitely write the DA's office and pardons and paroles about his case and oppose any release should he be arrested. And I would certainly advocate for a warrant to be issued and a hold to be issued on him. So in other words, he goes to federal prison. Let's say he spends 8.5 years and they're getting ready to release him. Well, Texas could put a hold on him so that he doesn't get released from federal prison and wherever he's serving his time. And in federal court, he could be sent anywhere in the country to serve that federal sentence, not just in the state where he was convicted, because it's a federal crime. So there's the whole federal prison system. So they'll evaluate him based on his threat level and security risk, and they'll send him to a federal prison that's inside that sort of category that they think his risk level is. And so before he gets out, they would have paperwork from the state of Texas that would say, we want you to hold him, which just means notify us before he is released, usually about 30 days before his release, because we want to prosecute him for parole violations. So when he gets released, he doesn't get released. We show up to pick him up, and custody is just transferred from the federal marshals to the Texas authorities. And he gets taken back to Texas to be prosecuted for a parole violation. They can absolutely do that if the authorities are willing. And I think the family, any friends, public members should write the DA's office and the pardons and parole people and advocate for that.
Okay, that's great. Shortly after recording my interview with Francey Hakes, I received some important new information from a Facebook post dated October 3rd, 2024 by Angela's baby sister, Jackie. She writes, "So here's some good news. Looks like Texas will snag him up after he serves his federal time, and then he gets to serve the 35 years where he belongs. He will still be breathing, so I'm not fully satisfied, but I will take this." Now I'm going to share with you portions of an email from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice posted by Jackie on Facebook. You are registered in the Confidential Integrated Victim Services System to receive notifications on the following offender: Henson Lee Everett. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice Victim Services Division sends our sincere regrets for the criminal victimization you have experienced. It is our goal to assist you in participating in the criminal justice process. This is to notify you that the TDCJ Parole Division issued a warrant for the arrest of this offender due to an alleged violation of the conditions of supervision. You may contact the CCU Interstate Compact Section in Austin for additional information on this offender's status. The warrant will remain active until the offender is arrested or the warrant is withdrawn. We will notify you of changes to the offender's warrant status. Angela's family has tried to contact the Victim Services Division to confirm further details for us, but has not been able to reach them at the time of the recording of this episode. We will keep you updated on the details. Can you talk about, to me, all I hear on the news is fentanyl is such a dangerous drug and it's a crisis in our country. So I was just shocked at what seemed like a light sentence to me for distribution of that. Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I'm actually sort of surprised the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuted this case, and I'm not quite sure why they did, because it's not a massive amount of drugs. Normally, because there's what's called concurrent jurisdiction. So he could have been prosecuted by state DAs there in Mississippi or by the federal authorities. The fact that the federal authorities prosecuted him is interesting. And my guess, and it's just an educated guess, but my guess is because of his prior conviction as a murderer, the U.S. Attorney's Office said, this guy's dangerous, we have to get him off the streets. And so they took the case. But when it comes to quantity or weight, as we called it in the U.S. Attorney's Office, weight, what kind of weight was he dealing? It wasn't a ton. He had I think $4,000 on him, not a lot of money. He was obviously a small-time dealer. He had, I think, 900 doses of fentanyl still a fairly small time amount. He only had 4 ounces, I think it was, grams, I forget, of cocaine, but it's not like he had bricks. He didn't have any bricks of cocaine. They dropped the cocaine charges. It was such a small amount. So in the grand scheme of what gets prosecuted by federal authorities, it's actually a really interesting case because it doesn't meet the normal threshold amounts for prosecution. I think it was part of their Project Safe Neighborhoods push to put violent criminals behind bars. Frankly, I think the gun is the entire reason the U.S. Attorney's Office took the case, because they could charge 924C and stack his sentence or impose his sentence consecutively and get a really good sentence, because on just the drug charge, he wasn't going away for a really long time.
That's kind of all my questions. I did want to ask, were you able to look at the John Shores case? Because that was one of my bonus questions.
The whole question of why these 2 defendants got out early is part of what Jim Clementi, my co-host on Best Case, Worst Case, and I have discussed for multiple episodes over several years now. I find it absolutely enraging, this open the jails mentality that has been going on now in DA's offices all around the country, by parole boards all around the country, by governors all around the country. And it's not even a political thing. It's everywhere. It's in every major city and lots of states in this country. And DA's offices have gone completely, AWOL when it comes to their duty, which is to victims and to public safety. That's it. That's their job. But we, the people, are electing these district attorneys who come in with a social justice message. Now, I have nothing against social justice as a concept. Social justice, when you just look at the definition of that, is right, because we are getting justice. Justice is a concept we should all get behind. It is not justice to sentence people lightly. It is not justice when the district attorney in New York downgrades 60% of the felony arrests that New York Police Department brings them to misdemeanors. 60% of felonies are downgraded to misdemeanors in the state of New York. And people wonder why criminals are running rampant in that city. And in LA, it's happening there too. The district attorney, who's in a very tough election fight, if I'm not mistaken, that is happening here in the next 6 weeks, because he promised the same thing when he came into office. He downgraded death penalty cases, took the death penalty off the table. A multiple murderer who was let out because he was treated as a juvenile by this DA has now committed new crimes, new murder crimes. And so that's multiple dead people at the hands of this DA. And literally blood, not literally, but you know what I'm saying? Blood is on his hands. And
Yeah.
that is what drives me so crazy about this recent push. It happened during the pandemic when jails were thrown open because of this panic about people catching COVID and dying, even though that was not happening in jails. And so jails were tossed open by governors all around the state, judges all around the country were letting people out of jail over the fear that they would catch COVID. And so, you've had
Well, I mean, a lot of people did catch COVID in jail. I don't think they should have opened the jails because of it, but people caught COVID everywhere.
Agreed. Well, a lot of people caught COVID. I mean, that's the point. I didn't mean they didn't catch it, but I mean, it's just the argument over the last 5 years in particular to let people out of jail, to treat felonies as misdemeanors, to sentence very lightly what we would have called in the DA's office back in my day, Charmin Awards left, right, and center for being soft on crime, is really dangerous. And it is something the public all over this country is now paying for. And so Jim and I have advocated on our podcast a million times, you need to understand who your district attorneys are, or state's attorney in some states, or Commonwealth attorneys in some states. You need to understand the Superior Court. I think in New York, it's actually called the Supreme Court. In some states, it may be called State Court. In Georgia, it's Superior Court that handles the felonies. You need to understand what judges you're electing or retaining in the states that do their elections that way, because these people are directly putting the public in danger from murderers, and they are not getting justice for victims. It is not justice for Henson to be out of prison able to commit these new violent crimes. He's such a malignant figure, but he is so disrespectful of the justice system that he knows he's a convicted felon, and he gets out, and not only does he deal fentanyl, but he deals it possessing 2 firearms, which he knows perfectly well are illegal for him to possess. It's illegal for him, Julie, to possess one bullet as a convicted felon. And he so disregards the law and the rules that that's what he does. And so he certainly deserved to be prosecuted federally. But the fact that he got out long before his sentence was up in a murder case of a 16-year-old girl, a brutal, premeditated, pre-planned, torturous murder, and he gets out early. It shocks me. I mean, it really does. It should shock the conscience of everyone listening to your podcast, Julie.
I mean, the sentences to begin with were light. Why do you think that Lee was sentenced to 75 years and not life in prison?
I know. Well, they killed a child. And for me, that's what I call a pine box sentence. They ought to get out of prison in a pine box, because they don't ever deserve to breathe free air again. That's just my hard rule for when you kill a child. And unfortunately, that didn't happen in this case.
Yeah, it's terrible. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. And we, if there's any more developments, we'd love to have you on and get your expertise.
Anytime, Julie. It's a pleasure. And thank you for doing our podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I told everybody that would listen, especially my sister, who's a huge soap fan, that I had a famous Days of Our Lives actress on my podcast, and she had to immediately tune in because she was so excited. So I'm sure there are lots of soap fans out there who appreciate you as well. But it's incredible what you've done with your career, and really going back and looking at this murder of a child that you knew from your hometown is, well, I congratulate you on, a great podcast, but more importantly, shining a light on something that really needs light in the darkness. And I'm sure her family really appreciates you too, because it's incredibly lonely being a victim or a victim's family member, especially a murder victim's family member, because for decades they live with the shock and horror that their loved one has been murdered, and it doesn't go away. As long as the offender is alive, it's like an open wound for them. And so I'm really glad you've shined a light, and I'm sure they take at least a little comfort from that.
It's something I can't even imagine. I mean, death itself, losing someone, is such a horrible experience that doesn't leave you. But having someone taken in a brutal way is just, it's mind-blowing. I can't even imagine. So, and thank you for what you do and the light you continue to shine on your podcast.
Well, thank you, Julie. Anytime, I'll be back.
Please like and follow True Texas Crime, The Significant Life of Angela Stevens, wherever you get your podcasts. We will have an upcoming bonus episode on the making of the podcast, and we will continue to update our audience on how you can advocate on behalf of Angela. True Texas Crime, The Significant Life of Angela Stevens is a North End Burgers production. Recorded, hosted, and written by me, Julie Dove. Carrie Southard Hargrave is the executive producer. Studio recording by Matt Gergel, Real Voice LA. Sound design and mixing by Real Voice LA. Opening music, The Colonel, courtesy of Zachariah Hickman. Closing music, Night in the Prairie, courtesy of Derek and Brandon Feicher. Special thanks to Jackie Stevens Tower and Amy Harper Fritz. The views expressed by this podcast host and participants are solely that of the person speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views of any employer, company, institution, or other associated parties.